Hey guys, Rick Taylor here with KS USA. Today we're going to talk about how to service your LEV dropper seat post. Okay, so some of the basic tools that we're going to need to service KS dropper we'll go over here. If there are additional or specific or specialty tools for your particular model that we're going to go over, we'll discuss those in further detail a little bit later on in the video. So you want to start with a good quality biodegradable degreaser. We tend to like the simple green cleaners here. You can dilute them down to whatever ratio you want. They wash away easily, and they're not caustic or damaging. So a good degreaser. For lubrication, we recommend either the KS post paste, or if you don't have that available, the slick oleum is basically the same formula. It's designed specifically for suspension use, more specifically air oil systems, so it's a really good lubrication to use. We don't recommend using automotive grease because they tend to be a higher viscosity and can cause poor performance of your dropper if you use those. A pair of soft jaws so that you can hold the seat post. The one that we have here happens to have a round clamp hole in it, but if you can't find one of these in your local market, you can also do a V-block, which a lot of times you can get those from Amazon or from a local hardware store, a machine shop supply. Those kind of places have them. And essentially you just need something that you're going to be able to clamp and hold the tube. If you don't have access to that, don't panic. You can also use the bicycle frame to hold the post in place while we unthread the collar. We'll go over that in a little more detail later. Utility knife, we generally will use this just to help us remove the guide bushings. So these are handy to have. If you don't have one, you can do it by using your fingernail, but I'd recommend if you can find a utility knife, definitely grab that. A set of Allen wrenches. So you're going to need from a 6 down to a 1.5 millimeter set. So they can either be a T-handle like this, or you can have one of the little pocket folding ones work great too, but just make sure they're good quality so you don't end up rounding or stripping out any of the bolts. Last would be a strap wrench, and the strap wrench is basically to remove the collar. You'll need these on nearly all models of KS dropper, with the exception of the A12 Integra and the Rage I. So those two will use a little different system that we'll talk about later, but the strap wrench you can get from most hardware stores, and they're generally used for fitting pipes that you don't want to do damage to. So if they're a chrome finish or something, these allow you to grab and turn pipe without damaging the surface. So local hardware stores, and again, this is called a strap wrench. And then we definitely like to use a microfiber towel for cleaning and the internal parts and everything. These work really well with the degreaser. They tend to take all of the debris off of your post. So you can get these through most hardware stores, or if you have a Costco in your area, they do their Kirkland brand of towels that work really well. So we're going to go ahead and start servicing our LEV. And first step is to use your soft jaws. Again, if you don't have soft jaws, you can clamp this into your frame at 5 Newton meters. You can see the smooth end here is the end cap. The sandblasted finish is the mast, so you only want to clamp the end cap in if you're going to do it that way. Highly recommend finding a set of V-blocks or soft jaws. It's a much easier way to do it. You can go ahead and clamp this in. Okay, and with our strap wrench, I'm going to go ahead and unscrew that. Okay, we'll set that aside. Now I will recommend that you compress this lever. You rotate the barrel as you're pushing the lever in. You rotate it, and hopefully you can see that there. There's a hook, and what I did is rotated so the cable goes around it, and we can push that coupler out. Now I recommend doing this because if you pushed on this with the end cap out, you could possibly damage this cable. So that's why we're doing that as the very first step. Okay, we're going to rotate this just for the sake of you being able to see this. If you're doing this repair at home now, you don't have to switch this in the vise. I'm just making it easier for you to see. Okay, so we're gonna put the strap wrench on. We're gonna be careful because the strap wrench has these link pieces here, and you don't wanna hit those on your coupler. So we're gonna get that so that it clears the coupler. And go ahead and unscrew the seal collar. That's going to unthread, slide out. Okay. Now, next step is if you take your utility knife and you want to catch the bushing right on the edge. So where the silver part meets the black part there, that's your DU bushing versus the mast. And if you just give it a couple taps, you'll see it pops loose really easy. That's the easiest way that I find to get that apart. Go ahead and slide that out. Now we're going to take this out. We're going to make sure that we keep our thumb here and keep that in the groove as we push this up. Now, if you have a V-block, you can grab a hold of this here. If you don't have the V-block, you can use your rubber strap on the strap wrench there to protect it. Even a soft block of wood would work okay here. But you got to be careful of this. It's hard anodized aluminum, and if you scratch this, the aluminum under it's soft, so it's very easy to put a big gouge in it if you're not careful. So when you're doing this, just take care and caution. I recommend just using a V-block if you're going to do this, because that way you don't make a mistake and damage something and have to replace parts. Now, the actuator, you see that hanging down. I like to pull it up out of the way. That way I know where it's at. If it's hanging down and you're turning it and you catch it on something, it's a small piece of aluminum, you can break it off. Okay, so I use an adjustable wrench. We didn't mention this in the tools earlier, but I find this is the easiest way to remove the actuator. Adjust it so it fits the whole size of the actuator, and then turn it counterclockwise. You notice I kind of did a bit of a kind of abrupt jerk motion when I did that, and that's because it helps to break the thread lock loose more easily that we put on from the factory. If you've already serviced the post before, you won't have to have the challenge of getting that out. Now, as I'm pulling this out, if I put a little side load on it and pull, it's going to bring the push rod for the valve. There's a push rod end cap here, and then there's your actuator. So I got all three of those parts, and I took those off first, and I'm going to set them aside. Then you have your bottom out bumper, and that just slides off. I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to go ahead and set the V-block aside. Now, two things. One is pay attention to where the front of your clamp is. I would maybe take a little paint marker or something, or even a piece of tape, and mark where that lines up. That's going to make it easy for you when we put this back together to line this up so the coupler and the front of the post is still in the same orientation as when you took it apart. So go ahead and mark that if you want to do so. I hold my thumb here to hold that in place, and go ahead and gently slide this apart. The reason I say gently is there are guide bushings here. Depending on what generation of post you have, if you have an earlier production post, you'll have a single lower guide bushing like these are here. If you have a later model, you'll have a metallic lower and a what we call POM, which is a kind of a plastic that preloads for the top. Now, if you have the all metallic one, you don't need to run out and get the newer plastic one. The reason that we use those is some of the newer posts do not use the roller clutch system. So there's really no reason that you have to use the preload system in this post. The only reason we do it in the later production is that we just use one lower guide for all of the seat posts. And so if you've got these and they're in good condition, there's no reason that you have to change them now. Okay, so we're going to use the tool, the utility knife, and go ahead and pull those out. We're going to slide the DU bushing off. And we're going to slide the wiper seal off and set it aside. Now, If you have an issue with your cartridge, if it was leaking oil or it has kind of some squish in it, develops some air in the IFP system, if it's an older post, now is a good time to replace this cartridge. The way that we would do that is go ahead and remove the clamp head. Now, discussing about the clamp head and this system too, the cradle will slide off on all models. You can slide that off and set it aside. Now, depending on the production of your post, you may have either a separate cradle that can rotate if it was an earlier, or if it's a later, this may be all one piece. So both are interchangeable. If you have one, it's not necessarily better than the other. Just what happens to be in your seat post. So if you open it up and yours doesn't look exactly like this, don't stress, it's just a different production series. If you have one that has the thread-in cap, we'll have to get a small screwdriver. Okay, so we'll take a small screwdriver and there's a cap here. Now, if you're replacing the cartridge, you don't need to do this. But if you've gone this far in servicing your post and you want to check the air pressure, now is a great time to do it. So there's an air valve here. You're going to thread your pump on. And you'll hear a little hiss when you put it on. You're going to lose a little pressure there. Also, some air pressure is going to go into this hose. So don't panic if you look and, oh my gosh, my pressure is really low. It probably wasn't that way when you started. You just let some pressure out. So what I would recommend to do at this point is go ahead and set your pressure. And we generally recommend about 175 to 200 PSI. Going over 200 PSI doesn't necessarily make the post rebound faster, because eventually you get to a point where the extra pressure makes friction on the seals and it really doesn't create any benefit. It just makes it really hard to compress it. So probably 200 PSI is the way to go. If you're purchasing a pump for the first time, I'd highly recommend one with a two-stage chuck. And what that allows you to do is I'm unthreading. So that basically closed the valve inside. Now when I turn this one, the only pressure that it's letting out is the air that was trapped inside the hose. You're not actually letting any pressure out of your cartridge. But be advised, when I put this back on and I thread it on and I check the pressure will be lower than what I set it. And that's because when I put this back on, some of that air pressure in here had to fill that hose. So it's always going to read lower. It doesn't mean you've got a problem with your cartridge. That's just natural. That's something that happens with the pump. So don't stress about that. So set yourself between 175 to 200 PSI and your cartridge will be ready to go. If you have the separate cap, go ahead and put it on. Go ahead and thread your air cap down. Okay, now, if this is your existing cartridge, you need to replace it, clean this really good. A little bit of the degreaser, microfiber towel, get it spotless, set it aside. Now work on your cradle. Do the same thing. Clean that really good, get it spotless. Take a little bit of your slick honey or post paste, put on the inside of this, and then slide this in. Okay, then we're going to take our seal collar, we're going to clean that, we're going to take some of the grease, and there's a cavity between the two wiper seals. We're going to fill that with grease. That works really good to create a waterproof barrier, keep moisture out. It also pre-lubes the stanchion when you slide it each time. So it's good to go ahead and fill that up. Slide that on. I'm going to clean our DU bushing. Check for any scoring or wear. Well, you got it there. And then you can put a little bit on the inside of it if you like. You can also put a little bit on the the stanchion, whichever way you want to do it. Just get a light film of grease on there. Slide that together. Then we're going to clean our guide bushings. A little trick that I found is if you take a little bit of that grease and you put a dab inside here, what it'll prevent is if you put this thing in dry and you flip it upside down, that's going to fall right out. If you put a little bit of grease in there, push it into the grease, it's not going to fall out on you. So that makes life a lot easier when you're trying to put this back together. So put a little bit of that grease on each one. Make sure they're pushed in firmly. We can go ahead and take our bottom out bumper, put it on. We'll set that assembly aside. Next thing I want to show you is how to clean the roller clutch. Sometimes the post, as you've used it for a while, will develop a little side-to-side play. And most people think it's because this bushing wore out and now I need to buy a bushing. Really not the case. What happens is there's a keyway down inside and this little bushing or key that goes inside of it. There always has to be a little natural play. If there wasn't, it would bind up. So what we developed on the LEV is a roller clutch system. It allows it to turn one direction but not the other. So as soon as it moves slightly, the clutch locks it and keeps it from rattling back and forth. So the later posts have a plastic POM there. These have a roller clutch. All that you need to do on these, you don't need to replace any parts, you just need to clean the clutch. And what you want to do is get a good amount of degreaser on your rag and go in and just roll back and forth. And you can kind of see the color of the grease coming off on my towel here. Okay, you can see more and more of it. And if it's been a while since you've serviced the post, you're probably going to get some grit and some dark color stuff coming off of it. And that's just debris and wear and tear and all that good stuff. But get it all clean. And when you look in and you see that that plastic raceway retainer is bright white and you can see all the brass color of the bushings, you know you got it clean enough. And then what I do is take the grease and I push it downward. And what I'm doing is I'm pushing the grease into the nooks and crannies between those rollers, and it goes inside and kind of fills each of those cavities. So keep working it, and you'll see it as you push down, it's actually going to squirt the grease from the roller around it. And just keep working that in. And it's really important to get these lubed good. If they're not lubed, they stay open and you get that rattling or that play. If you lube them good, everything works smoothly. Okay, next step is to pull this cable tight, and you'll see there's a groove for these pins. There's a total of 6 of them. You're only using 3, and then the cable goes in the other one. So make sure before you put anything together that that cable is lined up in one of those grooves, and it's the one that lines up with the coupler here. Now, we're going to go ahead and put this back together. And earlier we talked about making a mark where this point of the front lines up. So by holding this in position, we're going to line it up. I like to take my middle finger, index finger, and thumb and hold each of those pins. And now you'll see the spot where I'm putting it in is where there's no pin. So that's where the cable is in the middle. Now, you'll notice if you turn it, it'll let it rotate counterclockwise, but it can't rotate clockwise. So what I like to do is I like to line it up so the pin is just past the coupler. Push it in, and then I start pushing and turning it counterclockwise until those pins drop in. That's the easiest way to find the lineup. If you're trying to look in there and see it, it's really hard to line it up. You're always going to misalign it, and it's not going to work. So get the cartridge in, rotate it counterclockwise a little bit as you're holding the pins, and it'll drop in. Once it drops in, gently push it in. Next thing you want to do is, I just use the plastic end of this wrench and tap that bushing in. What I'm looking for is to make sure that there's no gap here. And then go ahead and tighten this down. You don't want to try to use the coupler, or the seal collar to tighten down the bushing, because you're not going to get it to go in straight and you're going to have trouble with it. So we're going to tighten that by hand. I'm gonna have a little degreaser still on the towel, so we're gonna go ahead and clean this really good, get rid of any grease that might be on that collar. Our next step, now we did put this bottom out bumper on earlier, so just verify that that's there. You wanna make sure that's in place. Now, if you took this completely apart and got them mixed up, there's a side that has a longer small diameter portion and a short small diameter portion. The longer portion goes towards your actuator, and it actually goes inside your push rod end cap. So make sure when you put that together that that's the direction you have it. If you have it this way, it makes the overall push rod too long, and the thing's gonna stay open, and you're not gonna be able to figure out why the post won't lock in position. So again, the short side goes into the tube, the long side goes into the actuator. Now again, it's always a great idea to just put a little bit of grease on this push rod, a little dab of grease on the top of that little button shape on top. We're gonna put this in and thread it by hand. We're gonna get it just so it stops by hand. Now, the next thing I'm gonna show you is important, and it's gonna save you a lot of frustration if you follow it. Okay, we're gonna get that just snug with the soft jaws. This is tightened by hand. Take your wrench. Do not put it on this way and crank it. You'll break that piece, it's aluminum. So put your wrench on this way, get it snug, and just, you've got it tight. You can see where this actuator is, so you see how much I'm gonna turn it. That's it, that's all you wanna turn it. If you do more than that, this is aluminum, it's a hollow shaft that goes in there, you'll shear that off. And then your cartridge will be no good because that's stuck inside, it'll be a mess. So just slightly tighter than hand tight is plenty for this. Okay, so we can take this out. Our next step is to pull this down into position. I like to use my hand down here to pull instead of trying to push from the top. And I'll pull that down until I get it close. And now you can rotate this. You want the groove of the pulley to line up with your cable there. Okay, and so that lined up perfectly. Sometimes, if it's a little off, you'll see that didn't seat down all the way. You need to keep moving it around until it lines up perfectly and make sure that the cable seats there. Now your next step is to push the actuator down. We're gonna rotate that cable clamp. What I'm looking for, see if I can get it up here and then move my hand for you. So what I'm looking for is for this cable to get up around that little tab there. And you can see how it just locked in, okay? So my last thing is do not push this while you have it apart. If you do, you can damage the cable. So be really careful with it. Clean the inside of your end cap if you haven't done so already. And then we're gonna thread that on till it's hand tight. We're gonna use the little degreaser in the rag. We're gonna clean that. Now again, if you didn't have the V-blocks, you could put this into your bike, tighten it to 5 Newton meters, just the end cap, and then tighten by hand. Just a little grunt after hand tight is more than enough. We're gonna use the blocks and the strap wrench. Okay. So again, just past hand tight. That's it. And then I'm gonna flip this around so you can see it. Like we said, we clean this really good. You don't want any grease on that when you're using your strap wrench. Okay, and again, be really careful. Make sure that the strap wrench doesn't hit that coupler. We'll tighten that down. Now, everybody's tempted to test the post right now. And I see where people take their Allen wrench and they think they're gonna go in here and test it. If you stick an Allen wrench in there and try to pry that and test this right now, you're gonna break that cable and you're gonna regret having done that. So What I'd recommend at this point is go ahead and put it into the bike, hook your cable and coupler in, and if you want to test it without the saddle on to make sure everything's good, do that. But don't try to use a different tool in here to actuate it. And then one last tip for you is when you go to put this in, make sure that the little tab, which is where the K is on the KS, is to the top. And you're going to have your coupler hooked in and your cable hanging down with your ferrule. And the ferrule has a little barb in there. That barb lines up with a little hole in here. So what you want to do is you want to pull the barb down, put your cap in, push it all the way in, then let the ferrule go inside, and that the barb will go inside that hole and lock it in position. That way you don't end up losing your cap after you've done all this work to your post. Then go ahead and put your saddle on. It's a good time to put a little bit of grease or anti-seize compound on these clamps. And then go ahead and reassemble everything and torque everything down to spec, and you're good to go.